Welcome to the Security on Cloud podcast, brought to you by Anitian, where cloud security and compliance are top of mind. Join the conversation with your hosts, John Vecchi and Scott Emo.
Welcome, everybody. You're listening to the Security on Cloud podcast. It's live on Anitian Radio. I'm your host, John Vecchi.
And I'm Scott Emo. You know, it seems that all you hear about these days is cloud. And for good reason. The advantages, the scale, the cost savings. You know, there's even a top 15 cloud security podcast list, which, by the way, includes this Security on Cloud podcast. You know, I figure a little shameless self-promotion was in order for all that. Anyway, we thought it would be a great idea to welcome a guest who literally works in the cloud.
That's right, Scott. You know, there are many cloud providers out there, but why not talk about cloud security with one of the fastest growing and largest cloud providers in the world, Microsoft Azure? With that, let's welcome today's guest. He's a chief security advisor in Microsoft's security solutions area. He supports U.S. and allied governments' information assurance and cybersecurity efforts by helping CISOs and mission teams modernize their security and compliance strategies, focusing on areas like zero trust, cloud, first identity, and SOC operations. He helps companies and CISOs understand Microsoft's perspectives on the evolving cyber threat landscape. He's part of the Security Cooperation Program, which is Microsoft's cyber threat information sharing program for global certs, and previously ran the Government Security Program, which is Microsoft's Global Trust and Transparency Initiative for information assurance and national security bodies. Prior to Microsoft, he spent years in the U.S. government working on counterterrorism, information operations, and regional security issues. Coming to us from Bellevue, Washington, it's our pleasure to welcome Mark McIntyre to the Security on Cloud podcast. Mark, welcome.
Hey, thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. And yes, I'm sort of in the clouds. I'm on the second floor of my house, and it's raining today. So yes, good timing.
I'm sure you guys need some rain up there. So right. It's awesome. Look, Scott and I, we've been plugging on this podcast, and I know for our listeners, we've always wanted to have, you know, one of the biggest cloud providers as our guest. We talk cloud all the time, so we're really thrilled to have you with us today. We've got a lot to cover. But look, before we dive in to the many topics we have, we thought for our listeners, just tell us a bit about such an interesting function you have there. It's
Sure.
fascinating. Can you tell us just a little bit about what it is to be a chief security advisor at Microsoft and Microsoft Azure?
Sure. Well, like you said, you know, I've been in the company about just about 14 years, actually 14 years ago tomorrow, June 11th, as I recall, 2007. And most of my time in the company has been spent supporting our federal government security information assurance work, but I've also supported efforts with NATO and with some other Five Eyes and other close allied partnerships around the world. And I'm part of a team of global security advisors. I have peers in the United States, Canada, Japan, Australia, around Europe. And, these are former CISOs of large organizations, Fortune 100 companies, things like that. And so we work with our counterparts, our peers, chief information security officers and their teams, to help them, understand where we're going as a company, align roadmaps, look for ways, lessons learned, just look for ways to help modernize their security posture. So it's a pretty cool job. I get to work with CISO teams around the U.S. government and the defense industrial base, advise them on our investment strategies and priorities, and of course, to an extent, how we build these capabilities into our technologies. These are high threat, excuse me, just like Microsoft, these are high threat organizations in the news a lot. And we have been getting the questions more and more in the last several years, Microsoft, how do you do this? You're a huge company working around the world. How do you, modernize your security, or how do you think about, employee device policy, or how do you maintain that balance, between productivity and security? So our job is to really help, have those those types of discussions that we can then use to inform engineering leadership on the right investments that we need to make sure that we're, putting these capabilities, into our products to help the government.
Wow. Well, so
Yeah.
I that is that's a big job. Well, and I actually was I'm actually going to shift a little
Sure.
bit of gears because if we've discussed in this podcast how the COVID pandemic has accelerated digital transformation, for a number of different companies. And what we were wondering is, what are you seeing as the driving force for today's organizations that are transforming and migrating to Azure?
Sure. Well, there are obvious, business benefits, cost benefits. Obviously going to the cloud, allows an organization to, let's say, get out of the business of managing a lot of that, traditional data center infrastructure and those systems and focus more on their core business, core businesses or missions, objectives. You think about, it was this June of 2021. So, we've been doing this 15, 16 months almost now. Obviously, light is coming at the end of the tunnel. But, our CEO, Mr. Nadella, a few months into the pandemic, he made a comment essentially that, we've been forced to squeeze, 3 years of digital transformation to 3 months, right? And so it's massive, even the U.S. government, where we saw the DoD and other organizations adopt telework, we're pretty quickly and very impressive effort that way. But these are still trends. The trends that we see around telework and around collecting, analyzing massive data, big data, device policy. These are trends that were already occurring. So I think the pandemic has just accelerated what was already happening anyway. And coming out the other side of it, it's obvious we're going to see more flexibility in the workforce. Which obviously is going to, is already and continue to change the way that, CISO teams have to think about defending, the organization.
Yeah, it's so true. And, you mentioned it, right, that for a lot of companies, and we crammed a lot of transformation into a very short amount of time. And,
right.
And, for many companies, the pandemic I'm guessing forced companies, as you mentioned, to focus on their mission.
Sure.
And in some cases, that was not only making sure to empower workers and their remote workers, but maybe pivot to another market, which the cloud could empower, right? But of course, getting to the cloud, migrating to the cloud, pursuing that mission can certainly have its challenges, right? So,
right.
From your perspective, you mentioned earlier, you talked to the CISOs and the companies about the roadmaps, what you're doing, some of the challenges. What are there's so many, right? We often call them speed bumps that companies face, specifically with security, as they move from a data center focused model to suddenly the cloud, and everything's very, very different. But do you see certain speed bumps that are big challenges for these CISOs as they move to the cloud, build applications in Azure, and to seek that, business mission?
Sure. I see. I see several, but interest of time, we can focus on a couple. First of all, let's, I guess, let's say the good news, right? The cool thing is that even compared to 5 years ago, we're not really having any discussions now about the value, the security value, the efficacy of cloud. People get it, right? You see around U.S. government and DoD, even in the IC, you see increasing, focus on acceptance of, cloud first, let's say. And so, however, it took us time to get there, but now the conversations are not, why should we do this? It's more help us do this, right? So people get that value. So the key themes that I see then are really more around orchestration and, let's say, execution. First and foremost, and this isn't just the government, we see this globally. Let's say there's we really have to do a better job collectively and helping our customers understand roles, responsibilities, right? As you move from traditional on-premises, let's say all the way up into a SaaS, let's say a pure cloud environment, who owns what, right?
Mm.
What does the cloud provider do for you, or one of their partners? What are they responsible for? Let's say if you're working with more IaaS or PaaS or into SaaS,
Mhm.
There's a really funny a graphic that anyone could look up online. It's whoever did it's a genius. It's been copied many times. It's the famous pizza as a service graphic. If you want a great way to visualize roles, responsibilities in the cloud, and one that also I suppose makes you hungry, it's a really sort of brilliant picture being 1,000 words model. That's just
Yep.
wicked marketing. But one thing that we emphasize a lot, or we're really trying to do more of, are these proactive tabletops, so we can be really clear as we're working with a customer to migrate resources to the cloud, or if they're creating net new resources. Let's do walkthroughs and tabletops so we can get really crisp on who owns what responsibility. And second area, I guess it's related, would be more around, let's say, ownership or inventory. As you move into the cloud, what do you actually get access to, or what can you start consuming? Um, I was on a call just yesterday with several defense industrial base members, several CISOs, and I was simply showing them just a quick 5-10 minute demo of our Azure Security Center offering, which is it's a free offering. So there's no
Mhm.
there's no blatant sales pitch here. It's free, right? And it's essentially built-in cloud posture configuration management. It's a hygiene tool, and
Mhm.
it's designed to show you the health, let's say, of your hybrid infrastructure. Um, None of, and this is no one's fault, none of these individuals I talked to had heard of it. They just weren't aware that it was built in for them to use. And so
Mhm.
we in the industry and our partners, we have to do a better job making sure that our customers and users are, that they know about some of these tools that are just built in to help them, facilitate these migrations, and become, hopefully even more secure as they, move more resources into the cloud.
And a lot of that, of course, is just, I mean, the expansive cloud native tool set
Sure.
that's there. And that's the power of it, right? They can literally swipe their credit card and stand these up. But
That's right.
if they don't know they exist, especially development teams and security teams, right? If they don't know they exist, it's
Right.
I can see how that would just be deer in the headlights as to what do I do next? What do I stand up next? Is that safe to say?
Definitely. Yeah, it's on us, to make sure that uh, we need to do a better job making sure that partners and customers are aware of the capabilities. And I think, to your point, also, we also want to make sure that we know which particular customer or stakeholder, business owner, risk owner, whoever in the organization, should own that particular tool, or at least should be using it. Is it a compliance team? Is it a security team?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a DevSecOps management? It's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things for us to still work through. This is still, believe it or not, this is still considered early days for cloud.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah,
Well, hey, Mark. Now
yeah,
in your intro, we heard that you worked a ton with the federal government, federal government side, that area, and so I got to figure that you're probably aware of the presidential executive order on cybersecurity that's kind of driving. It seems like it's going to be driving a lot of direction in cybersecurity and a lot of help anyway. What do you have any thoughts on on that executive order and kind of what that includes and where you think that might drive us?
never heard of it. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
What
I,
executive
I
order?
thought our odds were pretty good. Yeah.
That's right. I knew that we were not going to get through today without talking about it.
Yeah.
No,
That's a big deal.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And I think it's a great step forward. First of all, just a disclaimer. I am speaking sort of personally, as not necessarily on behalf of my company. Um, Although we certainly are, working aggressively to make sure that we educate our customers and partners on, our perspective on it and such. Certainly read the executive order several times. I guess I have three takeaways. First of all, it's definitely, I'll say, long overdue, and it's very much welcome. I just, for any sort of a security strategy or policy or program to work, you have to have top-down, management support, attention, and the language here and the executive order certainly suggests that we're going to see more rigor, hopefully, more thoughtful approach around proactive security, and maybe even to some extent a hammer, a little more of a hammer coming down, which is great, particularly around things like supply chain and software integrity. And of course, some of the really, really upfront language in the EO, was around, zero trust and modernizing identity and, cloud first approach. I think, definitely those are the right ways to go. It'd be interesting to see, the extent that, the extent to which, as future guidance comes out from CISA, around some of the terminology and expectations. Be interesting to see how it evolves, particularly around the contractor ecosystem. One last thing I want to focus on just quickly, given my background, is information sharing. This is always a tough one. Public-private information sharing. I have a long history in my company of facilitating these types of arrangements with the U.S. government and certs around the world. It works. I should say, when it works great. However, I really want to, caution that this should not be seen as a substitute, a panacea. It should not substitute for that, let's say the hard work of doing the hygiene and modernizing your strategies and operations. It certainly has a role, and it's a great chance for us to work together, in a more cohesive way. But it's not a panacea for doing that, that real hard work of making the commitment to modernize.
Yeah, and further to that, I mean, we saw whether it was this week or just toward the tail end of last week, the suggestion around the ransomware with some of these attacks relative to, the Biden administration talking about that kind of information sharing, specifically given all the ransomware attacks we've had.
That's right.
I mean, how realistic is it? I mean, and again, like the executive order, we that have spent a lot of time in cybersecurity welcome this.
Right.
That doesn't mean we haven't seen efforts like this in the past that potentially didn't go too far. This one has some teeth to it. But specific to that, even on the side of ransomware, what do you think when you see those kinds of requests? Is it realistic? Could it happen? Is it hard? Is it possible? Is it somewhere in between?
Well, like anything, it'll probably depend on how the final rules and regulations shape out and get published. There's obviously there's a certain reporting cadence or reporting deadlines from CISA the next several months, I believe. But I think it's a great first step in that we should be more assertive. The government should be more assertive about creating expectations, around transparency and such. It's understandable. I mean, it's okay in a sense. It's okay to be, probed and attacked. I mean, that just happens, right? The question is, how do you respond to it, and how do you maintain the trust, within your constituents, especially in critical infrastructure? How do you show, your customers and your partners that you are doing the needful, that you are taking this seriously, and maybe some, if it takes some accountability around reporting, then I think that's a great step forward.
Yeah, and I think of course we can assume that part of the reason of this executive order was to help articulate a strategy for not only the government side and the DoD side, leveraging cloud service providers and independent software vendors technology, but also as a model for private companies to deploy. And I think you mentioned it before, that the big piece of the executive order, which and of course we love to see that mentions automation in that cloud first strategy, which is fantastic. Sure. It talks a lot about the zero trust side. And speaking from an Anitian perspective, again, this podcast is brought to us by Anitian. We don't talk a lot, but I mean, obviously, where we're working very closely with Microsoft and Azure is to automate that environment that the application lives in, and create this zero trust environment. But as you talk to these companies, as we talked to earlier, who are moving to the cloud and having some of these challenges, and then they see the executive order where it says zero trust,
right,
automation, cloud first, all these practices. What are you and the Microsoft Azure team saying to those companies in ways you can help with things like that for them? Right?
That's a great point. This is more a matter of how much time you have today to talk about this, because we could talk all day. We have been investing heavily in zero trust and automation internally in terms of how we protect our own environment. And this predates the pandemic, by several years. Almost without exception, the vast majority of my discussions since during this pandemic have been on zero trust and on, let's say, modernizing security operations through automation. Just about, not a day goes by I don't have at least one or two, partner customer facing conversations about it, or internal sessions with my colleagues. Talking about how we've been doing it internally gives us a chance to, let's say, break bread and with our federal partners, walk through some lessons learned, use cases, things like that. We also have, created extensive library of content around, zero trust deployment center, dedicated website, reference architectures, workshop materials. I even participated, helped write with a colleague in Azure. We collaborated on a 6-part blog series on implementing zero trust for federal systems. And so we mapped the so-called pillars. Microsoft has a 6-pillar approach. We mapped these pillars to NIST and TIC 3.0. That actually predates the NIST finalizing as 800-207, zero trust document. So we'll keep we will keep pushing out more, updated guidance. Automation. I'm glad you mentioned this. This is, especially if you think about the talent shortage that we hear about in security. Apologize, my phone just rang. You think about the talent shortage in the industry. As my former boss, Ann Johnson, and the company used to call it the analyst fatigue, SecOps fatigue. You can really, so you have this going on at the same time. You have this explosion of device usage and data, and so increasingly our customers are going to have two choices. They can buy infrastructure or they can run their business. You won't be able to do both. And so this is a great chance where we can work together, Microsoft Anitian, we can deliver these, cloud-powered, cloud-native, automated solutions. It's a way to really help machines and cloud do that, do that first level, that tier 1 type, security compliance work that frees up resources, frees up the human, the humans, the SecOps teams and such, frees them up to actually do the more, the higher level, response work and remediation.
And real quickly, do you see, when you talk to CISOs around that, right? And one of the things we tout as automation is that please, let the machines, let the code do work that manually can cause trouble. As we look at the statistics of cloud breaches, the overwhelming majority of them are the result of misconfigurations in the cloud, which oftentimes can come back to manual, because we're human, we make mistakes.
That's right.
Are you seeing CISOs understanding the power of letting machines do a lot of this relative to keeping them even more secure? Is that safe to assume? And for our listeners as well, that CISOs are understanding that?
Yes. I hesitated a little bit because coming from the federal government, I spent 11 years of my career in the intel community. It does differ a bit, I think, between, let's say, some of the DoD IC customers and, let's say, more federal civilian, particularly around understanding, like, for example, the threat actors, right? But by and large, yes, I think more and more organizations, understand that, automation is a great opportunity for them to, let machines, let cloud do that 90-something% of that work, so they can focus their people on the higher level alerting. I think that the issue is more making them comfortable with the idea that this is not all or nothing. We're not forcing anyone into the cloud tomorrow. It's you go at your pace, go where it makes sense. And also, it's a great chance to save, to save some money, save budget, to show that you can modernize while also being responsible to your budget, which is a great way to show that, to show a CIO or a CTO or oversight committees, whoever, to show that, that you're modernizing and that you are making a difference, because there's certainly, I think, numbers that back that up. And therefore, you can sort of feed on itself, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Mark, also in the executive order,
Yeah.
there was a lot of talk about Fedramp, and
Yes.
in Fedramp is we're seeing a lot more demand for Fedramp and and that type of thing. That from our perspective anyway, because it's like a $250 billion federal market, for SaaS companies to sell into that. So it's exploding from our perspective. So are you seeing more of a demand from the Azure side for Fedramp and Fedramp onboarding for your customers?
Certainly. I mean, just in my own personal experience, I had, I think, 3 calls last week with ISVs, looking to expand in the federal market. In some cases, one case, the healthcare solution company, and so some of their federal healthcare related organizations are essentially telling them, we need you to come into FedRAMP. So they're definitely being faced with requirements. This is a real long, expensive, tedious process, unfortunately. They just don't have the experience in going through the process. So, certainly not a process that we would recommend for the faint of heart, or for an ISV or organization to do on their own for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we really, lean on, partners, such as Anitian, to help get these organizations through this process. Get them compliant, and of course, we'll continue to update our documentation and capabilities to do all we can to enable our partners to accelerate this process as well.
Yeah. And when you look at FedRAMP, it's a very high threshold, right? It's a very secure standard. And so we tell people, look, once you become compliant and certified on the FedRAMP side, man, most things that come your way, you're in pretty good shape. We refer to it to our customers as ready once, audit many. In other words, if you're ready for FedRAMP, man, most of the other mandates that might come to you from an audit perspective, compliance perspective, security perspective, FedRAMP will probably overshadow those, which is a positive thing. And in fact, we are now bringing our automation into the general commercial DevSecOps space to not only help companies just become FedRAMP compliant, but say, look, use this in your commercial environment. And we're actually touting, we use this term we call FedRAMP proven security, right? And so one of the questions that I have is when you look at FedRAMP, and then you look at the executive order and the way that it refers to FedRAMP, what do you see?
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as FedRAMP's future? Could it become kind of a de facto standard generally for the commercial side?
Right.
I mean, is that plausible, or what do you think about that?
Well, appreciate your comment, because I was going to mention, measure twice, cut once, but you're right. It's sort of let's say at least a 2-for-1, if you're willing to go through the process. I guess first, let's see what happens with the executive order. In general, we should expect and we should support, any effort that lays out baseline standards and goals, and hopefully, as I said earlier, with some muscle, or teeth and accountability. We're hard at work, delivering, templates, baseline security, configuration, assessment services, all these things, scoring tools, anything that we can do to help, our partners and help government security teams, deploy new systems or migrate systems that are compliant against a given standard, put it that way. And then, of course, use automation and and data to track in real time configuration drift and actually incoming threats. So I think what's interesting is that you have Fedramp, you have, of course, you also have the cybersecurity maturity model certification, and you have the new executive order. And I think in some way, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a compliance expert, but it's hard. The logical conclusion is that we're just seeing steady progress toward, let's say, more proactive expectations and rigor around supply chain. I think that's really, really important. And I've told, I get questions from governments, maybe, in East Asia or Europe, looking at CMMC, looking at Fedramp, thinking, is this something that's going to affect us? Or, I should say, is this something that we could mimic in our country? So like CMMC is a good example. It might be DoD focused, but every reason to expect that a FedRAMP or CMMC type regime will make its way into state and local governments or education, other critical infrastructure, and elsewhere. It just makes sense, and I think it's the right step.
Yeah, and I mean, look, got state ramp now, so you see FedRAMP coming into the state, and I think that, and so we see something similar. It's fascinating. It's really appreciate your thoughts on that. And look, Mark, we could talk to you for 2 hours. We could talk to you all day. It feels like we just touched the tip of the iceberg here, Scott. But look, it was a fantastic discussion, Mark. We really appreciate having you with us today. So thank you so much for joining us. And again, often our listeners listen to our guests, and sometimes they might want to reach out, get in touch. If any of our customers want to get in touch with you in any way, tell us where they should go. Is there a website? Is there a social handle or anywhere they can go?
Sure. You can visit Microsoft.com/security, and you can also just find me online. I'm on LinkedIn. You can also just email me, marmci@microsoft.com. Definitely look forward to answering any questions I can.
Well, thank you, Mark. And remember, everyone, the Security on Cloud podcast is brought to you by Anitian, the leading cloud security and compliance automation provider, delivering the fastest path to security and compliance in the cloud.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks again to our guest, Mark McIntyre. Until we meet again, I'm John Vecchi.
And I'm Scott Emo.
We'll see you next time on Anitian Radio.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Security on Cloud podcast. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe so that you can join us again for another episode. And for tips, show notes, and more episodes, check us out at Anitian.com. See you next time.